Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, November 6th, 2015, and we have got oodles to talk about today. I'm looking at the corporate media. Never have I seen the spin and propaganda so much on display as we are seeing right now. It's hitting new heights of mendacity all across the dial here. So we're going to be talking about a lot of that. Our phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room handling the phones. We've got a caller already waiting, but I'm going to ask you to be patient because I want to get through some of these stories. What's really amazing is I'm looking at the corporate media. The Ben Carson campaign is in serious trouble. And the revelations are coming out that Carson basically appears to have made up much of his, rags to riches story that he's been campaigning on. And they're thrashing, and right now everybody's focused on this supposed full scholarship that he was offered at West Point. And West Point is saying they have no record of it, and Carson's backing up saying, well, it was a verbal discussion, but I turned it down. And basically, the campaign is saying, yeah, he kind of fabricated that, but you shouldn't think of it's a lie. He's just, his memory's not very good, which is not exactly a sterling recommendation for somebody aiming for the White House. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more in detail further into the show, but let's get this phone call out of the way so we can get into the news here. John in Illinois, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hey, Mike, I just wanted to tell you, today is a red letter day for lies in the media because I just heard a Bloomberg business report.
Yes.
And they say that unemployment dropped another 0.1%, putting it at 5%.
Let me turn over the egg timer. Okay.
Well, that's basically full employment. That's the way they reported it. So no matter what now, Mike, interest rates are going to go up in December. The only question is when will they be raised after that raise? So that's what I heard out of Bloomberg. And then I heard Obama rejected the Keystone Pipeline because, well, oil prices are already or gas prices are already steadily falling, and it's really not in our national interest. But putting troops on the ground in Syria is in our national interest, and keeping troops in Afghanistan is.
I think what happened with the Keystone is Obama threw a tantrum because the pipeline planners they wanted to withdraw their application until after Obama was out of office, and Obama threw a tantrum and said, no, you may not withdraw it, and I'm rejecting it. End of story. I think that's what happened. He threw a little presidential tantrum rolling around on the floor in the Oval Office, kicking and screaming.
Well, I'll tell you, I think today's news stories, as well as the other things you're going to get into, this is just a red letter day for America. I mean, Mike, how can you make America any greater than it is right now? It's like we're at full employment.
Full employment. We got 94 million Americans can't find a job, plus all the illegals and the refugees coming in, but Bloomberg says we've got full employment. Oh, my goodness.
I'm telling you, man, it's a red letter day. So
that's a real schemer.
Write this down November 6th of the headlines, and let's just come back and look at it in 90 days.
I think that's a very, very good idea. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Turn over to the war zones. Now, as we reported yesterday, the siege of Aleppo has been lifted. Much of Aleppo is back under the control of the Syrian government. The hired mercenary terrorists, whatever you want to call them, ISIS, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, they're all ski-daddling. And the Syrian people in Aleppo are already holding protest demonstrations about how much they hated these terrorist groups, hate the United States of America for supporting the terrorist group. And they're just out there with the protests. Meanwhile, the U.S.-backed opposition groups are proudly posting images of beheaded Syrian soldiers in Hama. These are the people that we are supporting. And remember all the beheadings and everything that ISIS was supposedly doing. Now we find out our government was supporting them. And they're doing more than just sending them money, because we're getting a report now from Pravda that ISIS are using mustard gas in Syria. This is a banned chemical weapon. And no doubt Obama and Kerry are going to try and claim that this is Bashar al-Assad. But experts at the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have established that the mustard gas that is being used in Syria is being used by ISIS. That is nasty, nasty stuff. My grandfather, the one who used to get drunk with Richard Nixon, lost an entire lung, one whole lung, to German mustard gas in World War I. It is nasty stuff. Turkey has announced they're going to act militarily against ISIS in the coming days. And what is going on is that all of this so-called coalition that was using ISIS as the excuse to make war on Bashar al-Assad, they're desperate to regain the initiative in Syria, take it away from Russia. And that's why we're seeing France is sending an aircraft carrier. Everybody's screaming terror on that flight that crashed in the Sinai, so that they can say, we have a right to go on in and do what we want to do against ISIS in Syria. And remember, Russia's the only country that's inside Syria at the request of the legitimate government. And so they're trying to use this tragedy in the Sinai to say, well, we have a right to go in and it doesn't matter what the government says, and obviously risking a direct confrontation between the U.S. and its allies and the Russian military. And that will be the beginning of World War III for real. Now, Erdogan, flush with victory from his recent highly questionable election, is declaring that the fight with the Kurdish militants will continue until every one of them are dead, which is an awkward situation because the Kurds are supposedly allies of the United States in Syria. And so everybody's fighting everybody, and there are no really clear lines of demarcation as to who's on whose side anymore. Meanwhile, Ankara is announcing that the U.S. warships that are currently in the eastern Mediterranean Sea for a drill will be staying there permanently in order to protect Turkey's defense needs. So the ships that were sent there ostensibly for a drill, now they're there on station to protect Turkey from who knows what. ISIS doesn't have warplanes, remember? Now, Pat Buchanan has come out with a statement, and this is absolutely, I agree with this. Deployment of U.S. troops on the ground in Syria is a de facto act of war. And I'm sure the response from the White House is going to be, yeah, so? That's what we wanted. We've been working for this. Of course we wanted a war. Without war, without a major war, the U.S. is going to collapse. The bad news is they can't win the war. Now, a U.S. general has come on out saying that President Obama has known all along that ISIS was benefiting from the weapons and supplies being sent into Syria, that Obama knew that weapons being given to the so-called moderates were being turned over to ISIS. The article that I got this from over in Rumor Mill News is asking, this seems like an act of treason. We've all been told ISIS and Al-Qaeda are our enemies in the declared war on terror. And here we have the President of the United States of America and the Secretary of State giving aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war. That is the legal definition of treason. Now, at the very least, this giving of weapons to moderates, knowing they would be transferred to ISIS, is a violation of a law passed in 2007, the Lugar-Obama Act. And yes, it's the same Obama, which imposed strict legal controls on where and to whom the United States may send weapons. A lot of people are saying, where is ISIS getting all the money for what they're doing? And they're trying to spin this story about, oh, they're looting antiquities, which are showing up in the West, which tells you who ISIS is working for. But this article over here in Investment Watch blog said, remember, there's $13 billion has gone missing in Iraq. That probably wound up in the hands of ISIS. And don't forget the billions that vanished without a trace from the United States State Department while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. That's what they're using to fund all of this stuff. Now, there's a story, coming out of ConsciouslyEnlightened.com reporting that the rank-and-file military in Syria are starting to dig in their heels. They absolutely will not be sent into war on the side of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So all of a sudden, Obama may actually have a mutiny on his hands. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, everybody is moving into Syria. The French, the Russians are there, the U.S. This is just an escalation of, we all know where this is going, Mike.
Yeah, there's going to be a battle between a Russian warplane and either a French, British, or U.S. warplane, and things will be on for real. But what the American people need to keep in mind through all of this nonsense is Russia is in Syria at the request of Syria's legitimate government. The United States does not have Syria's permission to be bombing and invading their country. That's why Pat Buchanan is right. Putting troops on the ground in Syria is an act of war, for which, I should point out, there is no congressional declaration, nor is there a resolution from the United Nations Security Council authorizing an intervention. The U.S. government is committing war crimes just by being on the ground inside Syria. The same applies to Great Britain. The same applies to France. And I think the reason they have been pushing this whole terror thing on this airplane was it gives them a quasi-justification to ignore international law and say, we have a moral right to go on in after ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but we know they're really going to go after the Syrian army and try and reverse all the gains that the Syrian army has made against their hired terrorists over the last month. And, it could very well be that there was a bomb on that plane, and Russia has decided not to acknowledge it in order to try and deny the United States and France and Great Britain that justification.
Well, if there was a bomb on the plane, you know who put it on there.
Oh, yeah, we know who was in charge of security.
Yep, and this is what these people are capable of, Just look at 9/11,
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay?
And, hey, Mike, on Aleppo, when Aleppo gets taken by the Syrian army, complete control, it's pretty much game over then, because Aleppo is probably the key to this whole thing.
Well, they pretty much got it all right now, and some of those militant opposition groups are already making overtures to the Syrian government about a ceasefire. And that's why the U.S. and France and Great Britain are trying to gin up some way to get their people to go along with a massive invasion and conquest of Syria. Apparently not concerned that it's going to put us into direct conflict with Russia.
The problem with making a peace offering with some of these groups is, I think they should all be kaplunked.
Well, anything that stops the fighting, will make the appropriate compromises. Remember, this is not Syria approaching the militant groups. This is the militant groups sending message saying we're ready to quit.
One thing's amazing how everybody on the media is just a useful idiot till the end. They just have no clue what this could lead to. It's amazing.
Oh, they don't care. They're there to put out what they're being told to put on out. They're all paid liars and actors and presenters, and they're very well paid to do that. And that's all they really care about. But, now the American people are realizing that the corporate media really is just the ministry of information for the tyrannical dictatorship Washington, D.C. has decayed into.
The problem is the media is not in Raven Rock or Cheyenne Mountain. They're in all the major cities. So, they need to keep that in mind.
Well, they've probably all been promised tickets into the bunkers. Remember, going all the way back to the 1990s, the U.S. has been engaged in a program of building new underground emergency command posts all over the country. There's supposedly one under the new Denver airport. We've got one buried in the mountain here in the middle of the H3. They're all over, and all the favored people, the useful idiots who serve their masters rightly, will probably be allowed in, or at least they're being told they're going to be allowed in.
Yeah, they'll send a bus for Sean Hannity, but it's really a donkey, so it's never going to get there.
All righty. Well, listen, Dustin, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here and get on back to the news here. Now, turning to Israel. The Obama administration, Obama's thinking about his legacy now, and it's not looking too good. And the Obama administration is conceding that Mideast peace is not going to happen during his term in office. And he's got his frowny face on. And now his agenda, as Netanyahu comes to the United States next week to lay out his latest demands before a groveling U.S. government, is Obama's going to try and salvage his legacy by preserving the possibility of a two-state solution. That's it. We know we won't get any peace, but as long as we can protect the possibility of a two-state solution, Obama's legacy is secured. And of course, Netanyahu is out there saying, sure, anything's possible as long as we get that aircraft carrier. Now, speaking of media deceptions, there's a very good article over at theintercept.com talking about this horrible tragedy up in Kunduz, Afghanistan, where the U.S. just absolutely destroyed this Doctors Without Borders hospital. And the evidence is very clear. The U.S. knew what it was. They knew what they were doing. There were multiple passes with that AC-130 gunship. There were no fighters inside the hospital. There were no weapons inside the hospital. There was no fighting anywhere around the hospital, and they leveled the place. They turned the people inside that building into stir-fry with those high-powered shells, just broke them into little bloody bits. And this article is pointing the finger at all those prostitutes and correspondents in the U.S. corporate media who stood up there to defend a war crime. Even though they knew that what the U.S. was saying to try and excuse their actions had to be a lie, they're loyal members of the corporate media, and they will say what they are told to say, because that's why they're so well paid. But now we know it. See, when you have a controlled media propagandizing the people, it only works if the people believe the media is independent. Once the American people realize that, no, the corporate media is controlled by the government and by the corporations, the propaganda stops working. That's why they can't get any traction on any of this stuff. Now, up in Ukraine, we're seeing a story that there may be a Ukrainian army brigade planning a coup against Poroshenko. Get him on out, quiet down this civil war, get out of the European Union, and just stop all this nonsense that the United States started back at the start of 2014. Now, Russia is still trying to maintain humanitarian support into the Donbass, saying it is very complicated. There's a lot of need, and so far, they have sent 43 humanitarian convoys with over 52,000 tons of cargo. Mostly food, medicines, essentials. And he's saying it isn't enough. And the constant violations of the Minsk Accord by Kiev are not making it any easier. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here and getting on further down. First of all, I forgot at the top of the show to mention two program notes. First of all, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3 today. And next Tuesday in our third hour, we're going to have Dan McGowan as our on-air guest. And he is the gentleman who put up that billboard saying that we've got to have America first, not Israel, which of course resulted in all of Israel's shill screaming, oh, you're a Jew hater, you're an anti-Semite, you want Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the oven 3 times. Now back to the international news. The Maldives have just impeached their vice president in a 61-0 vote, the legislature. Apparently, they confirmed that he was behind the attempted assassination of the president. Guess he wanted a promotion. Which does happen. I mean, if you remember when there was an assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, John Hinckley Jr., his family were close friends with the Bushes. In fact, they even were supposed to have dinner that night together. So that's how people jump the gun, as it were. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the Russian plane, because at this point, everybody's lying, everybody's spinning, everybody is trying to use this for their own issue. And right now we're seeing this flood of stories about how the cockpit voice recorder captured the sound of an explosion, even though the report on the cockpit voice recorder from the official investigation itself said that there was a sound indicating non-standard flight before contact was lost with the aircraft. All of these stories that you're seeing all over the media are citing each other as the authoritative source to tell you there's a sound of an explosion on this aircraft. And it all goes back to the usual anonymous person with access, knowledgeable individual. It's all secondary, tertiary sources. No primary quotes from the actual investigation itself. And they're still out there pushing all kinds of different stories over in liveleak.com. They're talking about the possibility that a British starburst missile took down the Russian plane, and that's why there's no evidence of a bomb. This was apparently somebody who claimed to be within U.S. intelligence, called the Michael Savage radio show, Wednesday, and said the bomb story is false. It was a British Starburst missile traveling at Mach 4 fired by either Saudis or ISIS fighters with a handheld launcher. Well, there's a problem with that. The Starburst can only reach to about 9,000 feet. And the Starburst uses a laser-guided system where the operator with the launcher has to keep the target in the crosshairs. And there's a laser beam that comes out the front. It is divergent. It's not a single beam. It's a cone. And as long as that cone is intersecting the target, the seeker on the missile will track that in, and a proximity fuse will set it off. Above 9,000 feet, the cone has spread so much, you can't get a return off the target. The seeker can't find it. It's not designed to work higher than 9,000 feet. But they're just throwing this stuff out there to keep fanning this whole story about terror and all the rest of it. So they're out there still pushing it. Now, they're at this point, it appears to me that the United States and its allies in this conquest and invasion of Syria are trying to exploit this tragedy in order to create a sense of a justification to go into Syria, even though it is a violation of international law and the United Nations Charter, and let's be honest, it's an act of war. And I concede the possibility that there was a bomb placed on the aircraft down at that airport, and Russia is choosing not to acknowledge it in order to deny the U.S., UK, France that justification to come on in and muck things up in Syria. At this point, we have to presume everybody is lying until we get some hard facts, and hard facts are notoriously not available. Remember, the official investigation by the Egyptians is that there's no explosive residue on the aircraft. They're saying that one of the engines exploded. They don't know why. There's nothing on the flight data recorder to indicate an outside impact, and their first report on the cockpit voice recorder did not mention anything about sounds of an explosion. Just abnormal flight. That's what we've got on this thing. Alrighty, let's grab some phone calls here. We're going to go to Peter in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
I'd like to bring something up and get back to something which I don't know if you've covered it because I missed the first half hour of your show, but here goes. I know you ran this story that a guy named Paul Singer is now a billionaire, Jewish dual citizen billionaire, is another major donor to Marco Rubio.
Yes.
We know that Sheldon Adelson is another, the largest single Republican donor, period. We also know that Haim Saban is the largest Democratic donor and owns basically Hillary Clinton. And that doesn't even count the rest of the Israeli lobby. But I want to point out two things. There was supposed to be, between November 2nd and November 4th, the first ever U.S. presidential candidate forum held in Jerusalem. You remember that, Mike?
I remember that. It was humiliating that our presidential... I mean, that would be like the people running for Prime Minister in Great Britain coming over and having a campaign rally in New York City. Does it make any sense?
Well, exactly. But you know what, Michael? So somebody asked me, whatever happened to that? Because we haven't heard anything about it. And I Googled it yesterday and binged it and everything else. You can't find any news about it. It was supposed to take place the 2nd through the 4th in Israel and Jerusalem. I can find nothing. However, the article saying that it was going to happen ran in the Huffington Post. It also ran in the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel. They all ran big stories on this, and now we have nothing. And I want to hearken back to last summer, July, I believe it was, in the middle of that huge stink about whether or not we were going to get the P5+1 thing through Congress. You remember? And at that point, there were 60 U.S. congressmen who went to Israel in support, basically sticking their finger in Obama's eye and tacitly saying, I support Netanyahu over Obama on who controls our foreign policy. Yeah, I know you remember that.
Oh, I remember that.
Well, you know what? At that time, Michael, I couldn't find, and I Googled it at the time, any story which had the names of the people, of the congressmen who were going over there.
Well, the reason for the blackout is obvious. Israel and the American politicians are realizing that this is going to be an election in which friend of Israel is going to cost them votes, not get them votes. And they're still out there pandering to the Jewish money, to the Israeli money. And they're still out there when it's an Israeli audience, I'm a friend of Israel and everything, but they don't want the rest of the American people to see that because the American people are really starting to link all of the U.S. aggressions in the Middle East with Israel's dominance of our foreign policy. And this next election is going to be the year of the Mavericks. There's a tremendous anti-incumbency fever sweeping the nation, and there's a tremendous surge in the desire to clean all these friends of Israel out of our Congress.
Well, Michael, they had two things. Either that conference took place as it was advertised, and we are being blacked out by the American media on which candidates went.
Or maybe nobody showed up.
Or maybe nobody showed up. That's right.
All right. Well, listen, Peter, I got to let you go. I'm sorry. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go ahead and grab a couple more phone calls. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing there, Mike?
Doing fine.
Mike, two things, okay? One is, you mentioned about this, the guy before mentioned about Paul Singer. This is a really bad guy. Now, this is, you heard, I know you know who Greg Palast is, right?
Yes.
He's been in INFOWARS a number of times. As a matter of fact, he'd be a good guest for you.
We've had him on the show.
Oh, you have? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just started listening within the last 6 months or so. So the thing is about Palast, he mentioned Singer as number one in his book about, I forget the name of the book now, but it was about vulture capitalism. Okay? One of the worst. And the fact that he supports Rubio, to me, I mean, I don't like Rubio anyway. I don't like what he did with the, he's an open borders man and he's a TPP man. But this sews it up. I mean, this guy is bad news. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is what do you think of today's financial report? They're ballyhooing this like this is the second coming or something like that. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread now that the economy is all ripping and ready.
Of course, we're going into an election year. They're going to tell you the economy is wonderful from now through the election a year from now in order to protect the incumbents. But we know it's nonsense. We don't have full employment. We've got 94 million Americans willing and able to work who cannot find a job, and we are being flooded with illegal immigrants and Syrian refugees, and we don't have jobs for them either. Bloomberg's claim that we're at full employment, I mean, the bovine excrement doesn't get piled much higher or steamed much more than this one.
Yeah, well, they said there are like 275,000 jobs, and they're saying there's people that, that wages have gone up more than in a lot of years, and blah, 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 blah. But what they're not saying also is Christmas, this is the holiday time. So, there are a lot of part-timers and stuff being hired. So I just don't believe a word that comes out of their mouth. No. The other thing I want to ask you about is, going back to Paul Singer, some of these, and Shuffle Adelstein, whatever his name is, Adelson, don't some of the Jewish people like that, like, those two and the neocons that, a lot of the PNAC, neocons are Jewish, if I'm, from what the list.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And they're not just Jewish, they are openly pro-Israel. In fact, some of the documents on the PNAC website, like, Securing the Realm, was actually originally written for Israel's government, and then they said, hey, it'll fit in over here with the U.S. as we turn it into a superpower, and they brought it on over. No, there's absolutely no question that the people behind PNAC are very much pro-Israel, friend of Israel, and they don't care how many American kids get killed to support their agenda.
But what I'm saying is, aren't they concerned, and you might be a little concerned yourself, since I think you said you're a Sephardic Jew, that this is going to cause anti-Semitism. I mean, especially you take
No. Let's be very careful of the language here, because Israel would like nothing better than to equate opposition to Israel's government policies with anti-Semitism. They're constantly trying to do that. So I don't want to use that word in that context. Now, as far as were originally Sephardic Jews, but the Catholics took care of that in the 1490s when they tortured my ancestors and converted them to Catholicism. So that's the family history right there. But Israel, see, here's the way they play the game. Israel does what Israel does until there's a backlash against Jewish people, and then they scream, oh, Jew hate, anti-Semitism, we're the victims again, and they start that whole cycle all over again. And I'm not going to let them do that this time.
Yeah, because, but I'm saying that, like, you know, a lot of these guys seem to stick out like sore thumbs. Look at Michael Bloomberg. I think he's probably a Zionist too. On top of that, this guy's, he's a gun grabber. He does everything, and George Soros, for that matter.
Yes.
Even though Soros was a Nazi collaborator on top.
Well, don't forget, along with everything else, these people also have monstrous egos from their wealth, from their influence, and that's why they stick out like sore thumbs, because they love the attention. You know, they want to be acknowledged for being movers and shakers, and and in control of the U.S. government over and above the American voter.
No, that's very bad. But like I said, Rubio to me has disqualified himself. This guy is
not as badly as Ben Carson, but he's getting there.
Well, why Carson? What he said something about that he got a scholarship to West Point. He didn't mean a scholarship to West Point. He meant that he probably, back in the Vietnam days, they were begging for people to go to West Point, I mean, and take a guy like Carson.
Okay, well, at this, we're going to get into Carson because the West Point isn't the only thing he's been exposed as a liar on, and they're trying to find some way to spin his way out of this, but as far as I'm concerned, Carson just imploded. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show, okay?
Okay, good.
All right, thanks. We're going to let you go, and we're going to grab one more call before the top of the hour news break. Phil in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I'm flying high on a kite right now.
Good.
I was on Sputnik News, and the heading is Canada's new foreign minister says era of special relationship with Israel is over.
Ooh, I hadn't seen that one.
Well, flip to Sputnik News, and it's right there.
Oh, my goodness, I will have to look at that one.
Yeah, Stefan.
So now the United States is going to have to invade and conquer Canada and bring them back into the fold.
They're going to be vilifying our Prime Minister very quickly, I guess.
Oh, I'm starting to like that guy more and more.
Right, this is the foreign minister. This guy, Stefan Dion, ran for the leadership of the Liberal Party about 8 years ago, and he lost to a guy by the name of Gassius, who was a professor at Harvard for 25 years. Then they parachuted him in here, but he lost the election because everybody thought he was a CIA agent. So that's why the Liberals lost to Harper so many years ago. Now, Stefan Dion, he's a law professor. He's as straight as an arrow. This guy is university law professor. He's has very little charisma, but he's perfect for foreign minister. So,
well, I just found the story.
A lot of vilification.
I just found the story. Yeah, we're going to get the Abe Foxman talking doll out there. It's got a little ring in the back. You pull it, but it only ever says one thing: "You're an anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite." And
we're going to be getting into that soon.
Well, see, here's the thing: we have been hearing over and over for decades of the special relationship between the United States and Israel, but nobody will tell us what that relationship is. Is it mutual respect? I don't think so. Is it blackmail and corruption? Probably. I hate that phrase, special relationship, because it implies we're just supposed to accept that we're doing things for Israel all the time and we're not supposed to question why. And the time has come to question why. Why is Israel so favored by the U.S. government? The answer is the U.S. government is a Vichy government. It's an occupation government ruling this country for Israel, and has been for decades.
Well, I think in our case what it was is that Israel was committing all kinds of atrocities, and we in Canada said nothing about it. The Harper government just kept its mouth shut. Anyway, the Prime Minister was brought in on Wednesday. He he had already called President Obama, telling him that we're taking out our jet planes out of Syria, and then we
canceling the F-35.
And now this guy makes. There's going to be something every day, I have a feeling.
But, well, it's looking really good. All of a sudden, Canada's looking like the hip place to be living now, I got to tell you. And I'm waiting to see what happens with Arthur Topham's trial. The absolute lack of coverage that we're getting in the Canadian media would suggest that it's not going the way that Israel wants it to go. That the jury is saying, yeah, freedom of speech trumps all.
Well, the brother of the new prime minister has a documentary thing, and they don't mention anything about him. He did one on the Palestinians, and they just cover that up because that doesn't make the whole family is very straight as an arrow. I mean, that's
well, I'm glad to hear it. I am really glad to hear it. And I got to admit, the signs coming out of Canada are very positive, that they are breaking free from foreign rule from Tel Aviv. If only we could do that here in the United States of America, I would be a happy man. Thank you for the call, Phil. We're going to have to let you go and take a break for our news and top of the hour commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Getting on to a little bit of news here from the economic front. The United States is now going to give Ukraine a $1 billion loan to a country that can't pay its current debts as long as Kiev continues fighting corruption. That's the official story. We know what the money is for Kiev to provoke a war with Russia. Because the U.S. needs war with Russia and China in order to bring the world back under hegemony of the U.S. dollar. Russia and China won't play along with that. Russia and China don't want to be part of the New World Order. Hence, they must be destroyed no matter how many millions of other people's children it takes. And they're propping up Ukraine with your tax dollars in order to bring about this war that your children are going to be killed and crippled in. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has brought the oil price war to Europe. They've just carried out the largest price discount since 2009. And the move is to go after Russia's customer base. Because Russia's selling a lot of oil to Europe, and Saudi Arabia is trying to basically bring the oil war back by undercutting Russia, to force Russia to undercut. They're trying every trick they can to get these wars going. The United States government is between a rock and the hard place. The rock is that if the United States can't get a world war going, the economy will implode and take the federal government with it. The hard place is the U.S. can't win the war. But hey, it worked the last 2 times, so we'll give it the good try. I think too much military planning is being done in Washington, D.C. on this idea that the U.S. has never lost a war. Ignoring that little debacle in Vietnam. Ignoring the fact that 50% of the covert overthrows the U.S. government has tried since the end of World War II have been utter failures. And let's be very honest about it. The United States did not win World War II all by itself. In fact, Roosevelt didn't bring the United States into the war until Germany was already in retreat. They just hopped on the winning side and tried to take credit for it. Over in Greece, 2.1 million people are facing a blackout as the public power company deals with the fact that people can't pay the electric bills anymore. Unpaid electric bills in Greece have now hit 2.5 billion, with a B, euros. So they're going to start pulling the plugs on those people. And it's not like it's the people's fault. It's not like they don't want to pay their bills, but austerity means all the money goes to the bankers, and the Greek people aren't allowed to have any. And have you noticed this incredible double standard between the way the IMF is treating Greece and the way the IMF is treating Ukraine? Where even though Ukraine is about to default on the $3 billion they owe Russia for oil and gas, the IMF is going to waive their rules, saying no more money to countries that are in default. And they're going to, we'll give you some more money, Kiev. Just keep on poking Russia until we get the response that we want. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Over at the COMEX, they're currently holding 5 tons of registered gold in their vaults. 5. Against an estimated 40 tons standing for delivery. In other words, there are delivery orders coming in for 8 times as much gold as is actually physically there. Now remember, those paper contracts are leveraged 231 to 1 against physical gold. That means for every 1 ounce of physical gold out on the marketplace, there are 231 ounces of paper contracts promising to deliver. That's absolutely insane leveraging. Now, despite the positive news coming out of Bloomberg and the rest of the corporate prostitutes and correspondents, the labor participation rate in the United States of America remains at a 37-year low. 94.5 million Americans willing and able to work cannot find a job. So yes, let's open the borders and let all kinds of illegal immigrants and refugees pour on in. We don't have jobs for our own people. We won't have jobs for them. Over 60% of the illegal immigrant families now in the country are on welfare. It's amazing. All righty, let's see. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Mike.
Into the show.
Hello, Mike in Canada. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Mr. Rivero, how are you this afternoon?
Biodegradable.
Excellent. Okay, so I just want to say a few things about this little gushing love affair everybody's having with Justin Trudeau and how short people's memories are. It was Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in 1974 that took the power away from the Bank of
hang on, Mike, I'm going to cut you off right here because, the younger Trudeau may be nothing like the older Trudeau, and I can think of no better example of that than here in the United States of America, comparing Ron Paul, who was really great, to Rand Paul, who's your basic average sellout to Israel politician.
Well, I'm not finished. But the fact is, it was that family name that took the power away from the Bank of Canada.
Hey, you're not listening to me. We're not going to judge Justin Trudeau on the basis of his father. It's not necessarily a valid comparison to make. Again, given the dichotomy between Ron Paul and Rand Paul. Let's wait and see what Justin is going to do. Thank you for the phone call. Now then, speaking of politics and corruption, it's getting good out there. It has now come out, this is being reported at freebeacon.com and a bunch of other places, when Hillary Clinton took office as Secretary of State, she was required to sign several legal documents acknowledging that she understood how classified information was supposed to be handled and the criminal penalties that would result if she broke those rules. And so Hillary Clinton knew what she was doing at the time with her private email server, and reckless handling of classified documents was a violation of the law. Now, to me, she had to have a reason to be playing her email that way, knowing it opened her up to legal charges. And I still think that her combination of a private email server with worse security than Ashley Madison, coupled with that charitable foundation, may have been a repeat of the Clintons' 1995 Chinagate scandal, secrets for donations. It's an obvious linkage to make, and nobody in government or the corporate media dares make it. Now, we've got an article from Investment Watch blog. 2 sources are now reporting the FBI does have enough information to file charges on Hillary Clinton. We keep hearing this. I don't think so. The FBI had enough information to charge Lois Lerner. They didn't. The FBI had enough information to report that Vince Foster did not commit suicide but was murdered, but they didn't. This is what the FBI does. They cover up for the rulers. So, Hillary's out there campaigning, and according to this article over in forward.com, she's pledging to reaffirm the unbreakable bond with Israel. Huzzah, huzzah, I will hug and cuddle Benjamin Netanyahu. In fact, she's out there promising that when she becomes president, the very first month that she's president of the United States, she will invite Netanyahu to the White House. Maybe let him sleep in the Lincoln bedroom for a generous campaign donation or donation to the charitable fund. So she's out there pandering to Israel as hard as she can right now because she's in trouble in a lot of her other demographics, including women voters. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Hillary Clinton is out there calling for a federal investigation of ExxonMobil's climate change activities. Has ExxonMobil been paying the climate deniers? This is an accusation that's hurled all the time. And my response to that is follow the money. Where are the big bucks going? The big bucks are going in research grants to scientists who will support global warming, the media productions that will sell this story, public relations firms, the so-called science and education channels. That's where all the money is going. If ExxonMobil is paying people to question human-caused global warming, my checks must have gotten lost in the mail. And in fact, I dare anybody to prove I've been paid a single penny by ExxonMobil for my position on global warming. But one needs to look at a calendar and a ledger to understand this story. I mean, the carbon Nazis are out there saying, we're finally going to get ExxonMobil. We're finally going to prove that all the climate deniers are making huge amounts of money questioning Al Gore and his divine revealed wisdom of human-caused global warming. Hillary didn't call for this investigation of Exxon until after they stopped donating to the Clinton Charitable Foundation. Up until that point, they were all buddy. Exxon stopped sending checks, and all of a sudden, Hillary's out there to destroy them. Basically running an extortion racket's what's going on. And they're cranking up the propaganda over at change.org. They got a petition up there for people to sign. We have to investigate ExxonMobil. And it's the same old lies. Polar bears are drowning. Low-lying countries are flooding. It's the same stuff that has been debunked and discredited time and time again. And don't forget, NOAA came out with a report saying that no, there's been no pause in global warming. You were just hallucinating all that snow and ice the last several winters, and Congress says, we want to see your raw data and your methodology, and NOAA's saying, no, we don't have to give that to you. And in point of fact, they do. NOAA is a publicly funded agency of the government. Everything they do is paid for by the taxpayers. We're not talking military secrets here. NOAA has absolutely no legitimate reason not to turn over the raw data and the methodology, other than the fact that they were flat out lying to support the global warming agenda. So let's talk about Ben Carson, because Carson is now imploding, and it all began when some reporters wanted to actually find a little more details on his so-called inspirational story. Carson has been campaigning on the inspirational story of his own life, growing up in a violent neighborhood and himself a violent person, and how he found God and turned his life around and everything was wonderful. And a couple of the allegations that he made was that he had stabbed another boy in his youth and tried to hit his mother in the head with a hammer. And some CNN reporters went on out to talk to people who had grown up with Ben Carson to get some more supporting information. They couldn't find any. Nobody could back up the story that Ben Carson was violent when he was young, that there had been an attack on his mother or anybody else. Ben Carson launched, it's a bunch of lies. You're lying about me to say that I wasn't stabbing people and bludgeoning my mother. Which, I mean, let's be honest, if those stories were true, that's still another reason for this guy not to be elected president. But that was his inspirational story. I did it, so can you, so forth and so on. Now it's come out that at least 2 of the people he previously identified as victims of his childhood violence are fictitious. Ben Carson is admitting it. They were made up out of thin air. And of course, now we have the story about West Point, where he claimed he'd received a full scholarship to West Point. Reporters checked with West Point. They've got no record of it whatsoever. Then Carson tried to backpedal and say, well, it was an informal verbal agreement with General Westmoreland. And now they finally come on out and said, yeah, he kind of made that up as well. He fibbed. What's amazing is just about the same time that the Carson campaign was coming on out and saying, yeah, he didn't get a scholarship to West Point after all, DailyWire.com, obviously in the Carson camp, came on out with a headline story, no, Ben Carson didn't lie about West Point, it's another media hit job. Well, they must have a huge amount of egg on their face by now, because they put that story up right at the same time the Carson campaign was saying, yeah, it was imaginary, and you know, Ben Carson, he's an old guy and his memory's not that good, which is another reason not to vote him into the Oval Office. But Carson has now admitted he lied. He was never offered a scholarship to West Point. He never made an application. And this is the guy that the GOP thought they were going to give us instead of Donald Trump. Now then, one of Ben Carson's other goofs was his statement that the pyramids in Egypt were not built by the Egyptians as tombs for the pharaohs, but they were built by Joseph, he of the coat of many colors, to store grain in. Now, the interior temperature of the pyramids, and by the way, there's not a lot of room in there for grain storage, given the size of the building. Average temperature in the pyramids of Giza is the average temperature for Egypt, 68 degrees. A lot of insulative capability in all that stone. The ideal temperature for storing grain is below 40 degrees, because at 68 degrees you get insects and you get mold. It was a nonsensical story. So everybody was looking around, where did Ben Carson get this idea anyway? Because it's not in the Bible. There's no archaeological evidence to suggest this. And it turns out this idea of storing of grain in the pyramid is part of the storyline from the stage play, Joseph and His Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I don't know that that's where Carson got it, but if it is, this is a guy who can't tell reality from fantasy. So we got pyramids, violent youth, West Point. That's 3 strikes. Carson, you're out of here. All right, we're going to I'm going to have to take this phone call after we come back from our next commercial break. Okay, so coming on down to the commercial. Let's see. We're going to be talking about Donald Trump when we come on back, and some of the machinations going on there. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Bob in Indiana. Bob, thank you very much for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Well, I'd like to say something rather quickly if I can, because I'd like to talk about this crash of the Russian airline. Mm-hmm. Let's follow through the flight. We take off. We have the place full of people, full of fuel. We climb out. We get level at 30,000 feet. At that time, communication to the ground is cut off. Your transponder is cut off, so you lose radar. And then the yoke of the pilot's control comes back rather easily, and the throttles go full forward. The plane makes a very steep ascent, going up. When it gets up pretty high, the speed falls from 400 knots down to 60, and the plane noses over, because that's the way planes do on a power stall. And then it's vertically going down, engines full bore. it gets faster and faster and faster until it gets to never exceed speed, which means if you're over that speed and you're full gross, you're heavy, things will start happening like wings falling off, tails falling. Well, that's what happened. These pilots were sitting in their seat in the descent, and the yoke came back and shoved them back in their seat, and the plane abruptly went up, up, up. The G-force is building and building, and pretty soon, what do you hear? Snap, crackle, and pop. The wings fall, everything falls apart. The fuselage falls apart and spews mini bodies all over the Sinai countryside. What do you think?
Well, that's certainly a very good description of the process. Of course, the issue you seem to be implying is that there's something suspicious about the yoke controls and throttles. I'm not aware that those particular indicators had yet been published from the digital flight recorder. There's another explanation for the sudden climb, and that, of course, goes back to the theory of a failing rear pressure bulkhead, because if the empennage started to tear loose at the bottom of the plane, that would decrease the angle of attack on the horizontal stabilizers, and that would put the plane into a climb. And yes, it could either do a power stall or even a high-speed stall. When it pitches up too high, the wings would lose lift and it would simply pancake down. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much. We're going to let you go because we're kind of past the Russian plane. We're on to other things here. Now then, Fox News was actually showing, with the appropriate blurring and beeping, this anti-Trump commercial put out by this immigrants' rights organization. And we need to be clear here. They're talking about the idea that illegal immigrants in this country have rights. At a time when the U.S. government says that if you, a legal American citizen, step across an international border, the Bill of Rights no longer applies to you. But this group says, illegal immigrants, once we've snuck into your country, we have rights and we will not be denied. And they came out with this commercial with a bunch of kids using profanity at Donald Trump. And yesterday I talked about it in detail based on my many years of experience in the advertising industry. And I said, this commercial is not going to work because the kids come across as obnoxious and arrogant and demanding. They're certainly not kids I would want to have playing with my kids or in my home. And it's not going to get traction because the audience looking at this commercial are not going to identify emotionally with those kids, and hence they will not really connect with the message coming on out. Now, Donald Trump has responded to the ad now, and he was much more concise than I was. He just said it's stupid. And he's right. But I think my explanation is a little clearer on why it's stupid. I think some high school kid designed it somewhere. Now, the corporate media, probably they've stopped doing it now that Carson is self-immolating. But all week long we've seen the corporate media pushing out this one poll that had Carson in the lead and ignoring all the other polls, including the online polls that showed Trump is in fact still very much out in front. Well, a new Zogby analytics poll is showing that, yes, in point of fact, Trump is still in the lead. The media was trying to cherry-pick a poll to sell you Ben Carson over Donald Trump. Why? Well, because Hillary Clinton can't beat Donald Trump. She can beat Ben Carson. Ben Carson came with a self-destruct mechanism built in. It may have gone off prematurely, unfortunately. But this was the way Richard Nixon ran his re-election campaign that led to the whole Watergate scandal, which a young Hillary Rodham served on the Watergate Committee in Congress. So she knows all the details about what CREEP was doing. And the policy of CREEP was they went out to all the Democratic candidates. They picked the one they knew Richard Nixon could beat, George McGovern. And they sabotaged all the other Democratic candidates so that Nixon got to run against George McGovern and win. And I think Hillary's campaign is trying to do the same thing in reverse to the Republicans. She can't beat Donald Trump. All the polls are showing that. If the general election comes down to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, Trump is going to ace it by a landslide. So Hillary wants Donald Trump out, and she wants a GOP nominee that she can walk all over as she strides into the White House. And corporate media was trying to help her, and apparently the GOP is so terrified of Donald Trump, they're willing to lose the White House for the next 8 years, just so that Donald Trump doesn't get in there. And their primary Trump replacement, Ben Carson, has just imploded on them. The U.S. government has finally approved Secret Service protection for Donald Trump and Ben Carson. May not be necessary for Carson much longer. Long overdue. Trump does have his private security detail, which, given some of the recent stories about how the Secret Service works, probably is better than the Secret Service anyway, but the more protection, the better. Because if the political establishment cannot get Trump out with the Ron Paul treatment, I am greatly afraid they'll try the Robert Kennedy approach to him. Now, Obama has notified Congress of his intention to sign the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Text was just released. Everybody reading it is saying it is an absolute surrender of our national sovereignty and rights to corporate greed. And Obama is saying, I'm going to sign it. I'm going to sign this agreement. Well, a little bit of a wrinkle there. If it is a formal treaty, Congress has to ratify it. If it's just an agreement, it's not legally binding on the American people. Obama can agree to anything with any other world leader he wants, but it doesn't carry the force of law unless it's a treaty ratified by the Congress. Now, Congress is going to have a 90-day review period, but this is very obviously a giveaway of our nation, our sovereignty, our freedom to private corporate interests. It's the rise of the corporate state. It is the absolute crystallization of the fascist economic dictatorship coming not just to this country, but for the world. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Dave in Indiana, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'd like to give my punchline. The punchline for the crash is uninterruptible autopilot. These planes have uninterruptible power autopilots, so that people from the ground can make that airplane take any maneuver it wants.
Okay, well, that's another theory, and we'll certainly put it onto the list of possibilities. All we really know is that we don't really know the facts yet, but that everybody involved is spinning this for their own propaganda gain. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, if you are a sports buff and you watch a lot of professional games on TV, you have probably noticed from time to time where the sports teams will acknowledge a group of military people in the audience and lead the entire stadium in a rousing cheer of support for the military. And if you thought that was a spontaneous outburst of support, you would be flat out wrong, because apparently this is a bought and paid for propaganda campaign costing millions of taxpayer dollars. And now it has caught the attention of a Senate Oversight Committee that is out there pointing that all this military worship that you're seeing is bought and paid for propaganda to convince young people that being in the military is cool and war is fun and glorious and glamorous and you should want to go on off and conquer these countries and steal their wealth for America. Politics and corruption here. Over at the International Criminal Court, the judges have once again insisted that the court's prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, re-examine Israel's attack on the humanitarian aid flotilla, in which 8 people died, one of them an American citizen, in international waters. Now, this prosecutor acknowledges that war crimes may have been committed by Israel, but insists it isn't worth pursuing. It isn't worth pursuing. And the judges are saying, yes, it is worth pursuing. And the judges are putting pressure on her to do her job instead of pandering to Israel. Let's talk about the immigration situation. It is still out there. It is a big problem. It is getting bigger and bigger all the time. Over in Sweden, it has reached the point where their migration minister is saying, we can't actually guarantee housing for any more of these refugees coming on in. We've run out. No more roofs, no more beds, nothing. And when all these nations of Europe, being flooded by illegal immigrants and refugees, start running out of the basic necessities of life, like food and water, that's when the riots are going to begin. And maybe that's part of the plan, to destroy the sovereign nations of Europe and the United States with massive race riots requiring the intervention of the United Nations New World Order forces. Now, over in Great Britain, a senior conservative member of the European Parliament, actually, is accusing Angela Merkel of offering false hope to these refugees, taking advantage of her open-door policy on migration. Ashley Fox, leader of Britain's Conservative MEPs, also claimed the German Chancellor's stance is fueling the human trafficking trade because they're being told, get to Germany, they will welcome you in, they will give you things. Germany's economy can't support it. It's creating huge amounts of hostility with the German people. And now there's a new problem that has turned up because a lot of these refugees coming across their borders, claiming to be fleeing the war-torn Middle East, in particular Syria, have been found to be carrying forged passports, and they're very good. They're so good, they're very hard to spot. So somebody somewhere is able to create phony passports that are very convincing, Syrian passports, that are good enough to fool the border guards, and they're giving them to these refugees. That takes a lot of money. Maybe even the resources of a nation state. Meanwhile, in Germany, 400,000 Germans have signed a petition for the resignation of Angela Merkel. They want it they want her out of there. Sorry, there was a distraction in the back here. All right, let's get on to gun rights. As you know, Hillary Clinton is maintaining her ongoing permanent position that there shouldn't be a Second Amendment. Americans don't need a right to self-defense. We shouldn't have to worry about abuse of government, and she wants to take guns away from everybody because we can all rely on the police. My question to Hillary Clinton is, do you have a fire extinguisher in your house? Why? You've got the fire department. And of course, we know the fire department isn't going to get there as soon as you are, and the same thing applies to protecting your home from an intruder. Average wait time for a 911 call in this country is running somewhere between 18 and 20 minutes. All right, so, article coming out of IntelliHub. Corporate media is now openly admitting that the ultimate goal of all this gun control politicking is mass gun confiscation by force. You're not allowed to have guns. Only the government should have the guns. Look how well that worked out in Nazi Germany, for example. After lying about it for 30 years, the New York Times has finally admitted that the threat of assault weapons is a myth. They're not used to commit crimes. They're not used to rob stores. They're a fringe, hobbyist, shooting enthusiast weapon. More statistical confirmation that tougher gun laws lead to higher murder rates. And another examination, this one's from over in Investment Watch blog, the gun-free zones are actually more rightly called target zones. Because all these mass shootings, all these guys who their brains are melted on prescription antidepressants, they look for the signs that say gun-free zone because it means they can go on in and shoot people and nobody there is able to shoot back. Now then, there was a very strident article over in nationofchange.org bemoaning the fact that Americans are resistant to the idea of smart guns. Guns with computers built into the handles that will recognize you as the rightful user, owner of the gun. And they're already in use in other parts of the world. Why, oh why, will we not allow them in our country? Why will we not accept them? Well, the reason is really very simple. We're opposed to the smart guns because of all the government backdoors we know are built into our smartphones, our tablets, our computers, and so forth. Now, the primary reason for the Second Amendment is to give we, the people, the means to hold oppressive government in check. having guns the government can remotely disable kind of defeats that purpose, doesn't it? Anyway. Byron Price, the construction worker who intervened to save a student under attack at the University of California, is now saying he supports concealed carry, and he wants a permit to carry a gun himself. And that usually is the turning point for anybody who thinks the world would be so much better off without guns. They're the victim of a crime? Yeah, I want a gun. Talking about some computer stories here right now. More and more of these reports. This is in the New American. Microsoft, Windows 10 reports on the users and cannot be stopped. There's no off switch. Windows 10, as an operating system, is spyware. Now, 2 of the URLs that Windows 10 sends your data to are forwards that map to 2 other domains that are operated by Level 3 systems, which has been accused of spying for the NSA. So the data Windows 10 is collecting, it's not even going to Microsoft. It's going direct to the National Security Agency to make sure you are not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts. Google is attracting a great deal of controversy because they're changing their search engine to give priority to links, not on the basis of how popular they are or how many links link to them, but what Google decides is truthfulness. In other words, if Google decides your website isn't truthful, they will knock your ratings down. And they specifically mentioned the anti-vaccination websites, which is kind of interesting because if your website carries the story about how that CDC scientist who co-authored the CDC report saying there was no link between vaccines and autism, and he blew the whistle and said the report was a fraud, is Google going to downgrade that thing because they don't think it's the truth? We've got to go to search engines that don't have the arrogance to decide for us what we're supposed to know. I think we ought to boycott Google. We really need to. We need to focus on search engines that will let us choose what we think is the truth. Or we're going to be just another TV news network out here on the internet, putting out the approved, corporate-favored, government-approved propaganda. We'll be back after the news and commercials with the lovely Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And for those of you on BAM User TV, the gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire. You can hear from her giggling. She's having a very good day today.
Yes.
All righty. So what is the first thing that you want to talk about?
The first thing that I want to talk about is the link between glyphosate and a multitude of cancers that are reaching epidemic proportions, not only in this country, but the world. According to David Schubert, the head of the Cellular Neurobiology Lab at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, there are a number of independent published manuscripts that clearly indicate that glyphosate can promote cancer and tumor growth. It should be banned. And in their recent paper, Glyphosate, Pathways to Modern Diseases, Cancer and Related Pathologies, Anthony Samsel and Stephanie Seneff reviewed the research literature to evaluate the carcinogenic potential of this stuff. And they state that the epidemiological evidence supports strong temporal correlations between this chemical usage on crops and a multitude of cancers that are reaching epidemic proportions, including breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, kidney cancer, thyroid cancer, liver cancer, bladder cancer, and myeloid leukemia.
Now, if you remember that French study that was done on GMO corn and glyphosate pesticide, they ran the study for the entire lifespan of the rats, as opposed to Monsanto, who ran their rat study for just 3 months, then cut it off, destroyed the rats, and said, see, we've proved it's safe. Yeah. The French study found that starting at 4 months, the rats started developing serious health issues, massive tumors, reproductive difficulty, shortened lifespan. Monsanto used their formidable political clout to get the government of France to suppress the report. It was never refuted. Monsanto even got one of their former executives a job on the journal that had published the article, and from which it was then retracted and pulled. But meanwhile, there have been over 40 other peer-reviewed studies indicating a link between glyphosate and cancers. And now it's come out, of course, that Monsanto and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the FDA, have known that there was a potential carcinogen problem with this chemical going back decades, but it was kept hidden from you, the American people, in order to allow Monsanto to go on making their profits and trying to basically bring the world under the hegemonic domination of their GMO crops. And of course, if you get sick, don't worry. You've got Obamacare, and there are all these medical industrial complex hospitals that would be glad to bankrupt you to fix the problem that Monsanto gave you.
Well, in my world, in my opinion, the current dark underlords running Monsanto and Syngenta, and whichever congressional representatives were hyping the product in terms of government contracts for the stuff, should be facing criminal prosecution at this time, which should mean a long jail sentence for all of them and no club fed. And unfortunately, this will only happen when pigs fly. But if there ever was a biochemical crime against humanity right up there with Agent Orange, it's this.
I would absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, believe it or not, there actually is no law that says politicians have to tell you the truth. There's no law that says corporate media has to tell the truth to the people. And in point of fact, we've had politicians, when they're caught lying, defend their lies, saying it's their right under the First Amendment freedom of speech to lie to you and tell you whatever you want to hear. But we have definitely witnessed, Claire and I, over the last 20 years, the descent of the United States into outright fascism. And fascism is, of course, when corporate power and government power are aligned together and working together against the general population, to loot them of all their wealth, to take away their freedoms. Fascism inevitably has to be a dictatorship, and to basically sell us really bad products at very high prices to maximize their own wealth. And all these other considerations like safety, efficacy, they're just not factors anymore. Because our entire corporate government structure is firmly in the grip of money junkies who are just serving their addiction and cannot see the damage their addiction does to those around them.
Yeah, it's very, very frustrating. We try to do a lot of our own health maintenance by doing due diligence, by doing research, and figuring out, okay, is this study long enough, that I can look at this particular health product and say, okay, I can include it in my supplements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think people, Mike, are kind of, how can I say this gently, they're brainwashed about the only way that you can take care of your health is through a doctor, which doesn't always happen the way you'd like it.
No, it doesn't, because, the doctors are there to push these patented artificial chemicals produced by big pharmaceutical corporations and to steer you away from natural compounds that are probably safer and more effective. And there's a lot of very sloppy science out there used as sales pitches for a lot of this stuff. And I'll give you a good example. Last week we had the World Health Organization came on out declaring that red meat, and especially processed red meat, were bad for you because they had a study that showed people who were eating red meat were living shorter lives. That study merely consisted of interviewing people about their eating habits and then evaluating their deaths, but they didn't actually establish a causal relationship. They merely indicated that people who were eating red meat were living shorter, but they didn't establish why. Like, for example, people who are into red meat are maybe more active. They may be engaging in high-risk behavior, motocross, skydiving, so things like that.
Yeah.
They didn't establish a causal link, merely an associative one. But that was enough for them to go on out and say, see, this guy in a white lab coat that you should believe and listen to is telling you how to live your life.
Yeah, and, it's interesting with people from the Mediterranean, let's say Italy. Yes, they do eat a wonderful diet that is a little sparing with meat, and they use a lot of pasta, which we love, and olive oil and cheese, which we both love. But there isn't an Italian I've ever met who doesn't love their salami once in a while. And, so hello. If they're eating things sparingly, I can't believe that this is going to have that negative an effect on them. And the Mediterranean diet has been studied in terms of being very sound for people, includes a lot of vegetables, and generally helps people eating right.
Well, a lot of it has to do with attitude. I mean, here in the United States of America, the problem is we're all under huge amounts of stress. And we've been put under that stress by the abuses of government, by the abuses of corporation. And the other part of it, of course, is that in order to maximize their profits, food in the United States of America is adulterated with all kinds of fillers and chemicals and additives, and that's not even getting into the GMO problem. If you will remember the guest that we had on yesterday's show, where when he was young, he grew up thinking that he couldn't have wheat, he couldn't have milk, because they were making him sick. And then he spent time in Italy and time in Turkey and discovered he could eat whatever he wanted because over there the food was healthy and pure, and he was just fine. Came back to the United States and started eating the same things and immediately got sick. The reality is that our government now allows companies to use descriptive words of products as a brand name. For example, when you go to the supermarket and you see a can that's marked tuna, okay, tuna is now considered a brand name rather than a description of what's actually in the can, and there are some 17 different species of fish that the government allows to be chopped up and put in the cans and sold under that name of tuna.
And between things like Fukushima and our own Gulf Coast disaster, and don't get me wrong, I love fish, but trusting that it's whole and clean right now, that's a very big leap of faith to make, don't you think?
It's a silly leap of faith because, as we mentioned again on yesterday's show, the USDA certified organic label originally meant organic. And unfortunately, because of industry lobbying, that definition of certified organic by the USDA has now been changed to include certain limited amounts of chemicals, fillers, additives, and yes, even GMO. So they're using the label to attract people who want pure food, but they're not delivering the pure food. Such is life under fascist economic dictatorship. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about diet, health, and there are some dietary patterns from around the world we should be looking at. Okay? Now, the Japanese eat very little fat, and they suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. The Mexicans eat a lot of fat, but suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. The Chinese drink very little red wine and suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. The Italians drink a lot of red wine and suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. The Germans drink a lot of beers, eat lots of sausages and fats and lots of cheese, and suffer fewer heart attacks than Americans. So eat and drink what you like. Being an American is what's killing you off.
Oh, no. Ouch. Ouch.
All right, what's your next topic?
Well, from one of the most favorite groups of government for all of us, yes, the DHS, is about to increase Gestapo tactics at airports following the Russian airline disaster. And apparently DHS is not going to wait to see if the Russian plane that crashed last week was the work of terrorists. Apparently, the federal agency plans to impose tighter security measures at foreign airports ahead of any real conclusion.
Like I said, everybody is exploiting this terrible tragedy for their own particular agenda. Oh, we've got to build security. We need more funding. We need more money. Give us more money and authority. And, you know, that's the way these things work. And again, there has been no official conclusion yet. The official investigation is still saying mechanical failure. You know, but everybody is out there fanning this thing, and that's the way politicians work. No matter what happens, how do I get it to serve my agenda? Facts, truth, honesty, not even a factor in the American political discourse anymore.
And apparently they are saying that increased security will result in more diligent baggage screening at major domestic U.S. airports. And the move appears to be a reaction to remarks made by Obama and intelligence officials in the U.S. and U.K. that there is a possibility the crash was caused by a bomb.
Oh, they're saying more than possibility. They're acting like it's a foregone conclusion here.
You know.
And, of course, let's not forget, recently the Inspector General came out and said that the TSA, when they're being tested to find smuggled weapons, they miss them 95% of the time. They're too busy looking at the really hot blonde in the X-ray machine.
Yeah, you know, and it's almost as though, how can we, without ever really improving on security, make travel even more miserable for foreigners who want to come to the United States and travel as tourists, or Americans who want to go overseas and travel?
They don't. I mean, I can tell you, living here in Hawaii, our local tourism board loves to come on out and say our tourist venues have an 80% occupancy rate. What they don't mention is how many tourist facilities have shut down completely since TSA started treating the visitors to our tropical paradise as if they're prisoners of wars. I mean, especially if you drive up that leeward side, there's boarded up resort after boarded up resort after boarded up resort, and TSA's, fondling people like they're Catholic priests just has destroyed our local economy.
Yeah, and it's so sad and so sorry, especially for the really small vendors who were able to, set up their kiosk somewhere, and now they can't even pay the rent on those spaces, which are pretty, they've got to be pretty reasonable because it's only a kiosk. So yeah, it has made a horrendous impact on our travel industry.
Hawaii has really deteriorated since we moved here. And it's not our fault because we moved here, before anybody jumps on our case about that. But we have watched the decay. We have something like 7,000 homeless people on this island now. And, of course, Claire and I are involved in two programs, one for elementary school kids, and the other is a general hungry and homeless get the food out. And the need keeps going on up. Mm-hmm. And these people are not losers. They're not criminals. They're not druggies. We see young couples with children.
Yeah.
Young couples with education and skills. And there's just nothing for them to do.
Yeah. I remember at the center that we support, there is a very lovely gentleman, walks with a cane, very bright, with two beautiful little girls who look like they're preteens. And I look at this gentleman and those children, and I have to think to myself, this guy is smart. What in the world happened that there's nothing that he can do to work?
It got offshored.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got to grab a quick phone call here. Brian in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, I was just thinking about what you were saying earlier about, people being sick in America. People in Mexico drink all kinds of tequila. People take a little, glass of wine in France. That's fine. Well, I remember in Russia, man, 80-year-old women are sitting in park benches. They don't sip vodka. They drink vodka. and they're fine.
Yeah.
They really are. I mean, I look at my grandfather, the one who lost an entire lung to mustard gas in World War I, to the day he died, in his late 90s, possibly over 100. There was some confusion about exactly when he was born. Drinking wild turkey, bourbon, by the bottle, and smoking cigars, and just,
Yeah, the smoking room.
He didn't have a smoking room. He had a smoking county.
Oh, gosh. That's smoking county. Even better.
Everybody knew what was coming if they were downwind.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Okay, anything else, Brian?
Oh, no, that would just be all, I suppose. And actually, what else I'm pissed off about is... everybody talking about, Trump, like he's just saying, everything. And what I'm noticing, just being a pedestrian, just walking around and talking to people, being friendly, of course, people are pissed off. They don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. And I tell them, WhatReallyHappened.com, listen to this guy,
Thank you.
And listen to everything, question everything. It's not a bad thing to I have a brain. And people are really starting to wake up, but what's pissing people off is we don't know what to do. We're not going to get our guns and,
I wouldn't recommend that.
That would just be absolutely just.
But again, we don't need to do anything.
We're scared.
No, don't be scared. Don't be. If you're scared, the other side has won. Least of all, you should never be scared to question and doubt the government. The government's out there trying to sell you this big lie that to be a patriotic American, you have to believe everything you're told to believe by the government and the corporate media, and that's complete and utter nonsense. Nowhere in the Constitution does it constrain the American people to believe a single word coming out of the politicians' mouths, and we all need to remember that. Anyway, listen, Brian, I'm going to have to cut you loose. We got to take a 4-minute break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Claire, what is the next topic on your list?
Well, the biggest military exercise NATO has held in 13 years, Trident Juncture, will end tomorrow. Thank heaven. Deutsche Welt claims that even though 36,000 soldiers from various NATO countries participated, allegedly to defend against Russia's military ambitions, or what other outlets are simply referring to as Russian aggression, well, that's a head-scratcher. The organization is actually at a big disadvantage against Russia, not only because it's trying to coordinate 28 member states with different priorities, but Russia's training events in the last 2 years have involved up to 80,000 soldiers, more than twice than that of NATO. And apparently yesterday there was a big show. The choreographed battle lasted less than an hour and paraded all these assets overhead and on the road. And a narrator described a scripted set of circumstances at the fictional village of Casa Altas over a speaker system. I'm sure that the Russians were just absolutely trembling in their boots.
It's a theater piece.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a theater piece. Yeah, they go on out with all their toys and they put on a stage scripted performance to say, "See how mighty we are." You know, it's like when early explorers would step onto the beaches of New Zealand and the Maori would come down and make faces at them to prove how fearsome they were.
Yeah.
Only then to get shot by the muskets. And this is exactly the same thing. This is an attempt to bluff Russia with NATO's military prowess. Russia's not going to bluff because Russia understands that the U.S. weaponry is overpriced, ineffective, inferior, and that the U.S. and NATO are still mired in the military doctrine that won World War II and have not adapted to the new realities of more advanced standoff-launched munitions.
And, you know, if you want to take a real-world look at how good NATO is, just look at Afghanistan 14 years on.
True.
Hello.
True. Or Iraq, or Yemen had to go in a second time, Libya going in a second time, Iraq a third time. This whole world conquest was supposed to be over in 2008, according to General Wesley Clark. And here we are in 2015 in full-on thrash mode. And the United States has run out of money. They don't have the manufacturing. And if they think all of these new illegal immigrants and refugees are going to be effective, dedicated fighters just because they put on the American uniform, they're going to be sadly disappointed.
Yeah.
And it's like I said the other day about Sun Tzu's Art of War. Two of the absolute essentials a ruler must have to prevail in war is a military that believes in the moral rightness of the war so that they're willing to fight and, if necessary, to die when told to do so. And you have to have a general population that believes in the moral rightness of the war in order to endure the hardships and losses war inevitably brings. And the U.S. government has neither of those.
Absolutely. It's frustrating because with the Chinese and the Russian weapons makers, there is an understanding that when these weapons and the planes are field deployed, they're going to work, and they're going to work as advertised.
And American weapons work really good during the testing, which is usually rigged. And again, go back to that book and movie, The Pentagon Wars, to show you how this stuff is done. We have top U.S. military experts saying that the United States cannot win a war with Russia, even if they resort to the nuclear weapons.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very frustrating because, please understand, as a Christian pacifist, I hate the idea of resolving geopolitical issues with war. But if our kids are out there, I want them to have the best that they can, you know.
Well, war is what happens when politics and economics fails. I mean, remember what von Clausewitz said.
By other means.
War is the continuation of politics by other means.
Yes. Next, I want to talk about the U.S. Army and Air Force have teamed up a couple of days ago to deploy Stryker vehicles north of the Arctic Circle for the first time ever, according to a U.S. Army Alaska news release issued yesterday. Called Operation Arctic.
It doesn't seem to support the idea that there's no ice up there in the Arctic,
No,
does it?
it doesn't. Not at all. And apparently this was called Operation Arctic Pegasus, a joint multi-agency exercise testing the rapid deployment capability of the Army's 1st Stryker Brigade combat team with the Air Force C-17 Globemaster III aircraft, delivering 4 Stryker vehicles and approximately 40 soldiers to, wait for it, Dead Horse, Alaska. The brigade,
that's a hot flashpoint. Yeah. Sarah Palin can see Russia from there.
I'm sure she can. The brigade regularly trains to rapidly deploy in support of contingencies across the U.S. Army's Alaska's unique area of operation, stretching from the Arctic Circle to the southern reaches of the Asian Pacific area and elsewhere as directed. And the question has to be, why now? What is the timing? And there's an article from The Guardian that has the answer. Russia is set to renew its claim to a huge swathe of the Arctic in the hope that it can secure the rights to billions of tons of oil and gas. Moscow has long seen the seabed off its northern coastline as a mine of valuable hydrocarbons and is keen to fend off rival bids for control over the region's resources. Apparently, Sergei Donskoy, Minister for Natural Resources, said Russia had completed research on its submission to the UN, under which it hopes to gain an extra 1.2 million square kilometers. Huge increase. And apparently what they're doing is they're presenting this in a petition to the UN in the spring.
Well, the U.S. is going to veto that or try and find some way to block it. But when it comes to the Arctic, I mean, what would make sense is all those nations bordering the Arctic, they take their northern border, draw lines to the pole, and that wedge is their territory. Unfortunately, the U.S. wants to basically say the Arctic belongs all to us, which is amazing because except for Alaska, we don't border the, Canada does. The U.S. does not.
Yeah.
We're going to grab a real quick phone call here. This is going to be our last phone call of the day, and we're going to talk. I hit the wrong button. Dennis in Florida, I'm sorry. Call back. I hit the wrong button, and I dropped you by mistake.
Oh, dear.
All right, Dennis, call back. I apologize. It's been a long week, and I'm tired. What is your next topic?
Well, the next topic I have is something that is very important to me. And apparently there are new drone papers, and their revelations are a cry for the end to the slaughter. And apparently there's been a new whistleblower who has joined the ranks of Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and John Kirikow, and other courageous individuals, unnamed, because of the Obama administration's vigorous prosecution of whistleblowers, and the person's a member of the intelligence community. In the belief that the American public has the right to know about the fundamentally and morally flawed U.S. drone program, this source provided The Intercept with a treasure trove of secret military documents and slides that shine a critical light on the country's killer drone program. And these files confirm that the Obama administration's policy and practice of assassination using armed drones and other methods violates the law.
Of course it violates the law. You can't fly a military aircraft into somebody else's country and kill people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially what was really shocking about this release of papers was the methodology by which targets are being chosen.
Yeah.
They don't actually know the targets have done anything or represent a threat. In one case, they were simply targeting exceptionally tall people, figuring that they would be most likely to be part of some kind of a militia or militant group, even in the absence of any failure. And one of the horrible tragedies was they spotted a normal-sized Muslim man with a crowd of children around him, and they targeted him for being tall, and they killed him and all but one of the children. That's how completely out of control it is.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and grab this phone call from Dennis in Florida. Dennis, I apologize for dropping the button on you, and we're coming up on a commercial break. I'm going to keep you through the commercial break so that you can say what you need to say here, and you're going to be the last call that we have here. I understand you want to talk about the Pentagon?
Thanks, Mike. Thanks. I really appreciate you taking my call.
Okay, well, you're going to have to hold right there. Hold right there at that thought. We're going to take a 4-minute break for commercials, and then we'll hear what you got to say. We'll be right back. Okay. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program, last segment of our program on this Kaahumanu Friday, and we're going to go right back to Dennis. And Dennis, please tell us what you've been waiting so patiently to share. Dennis, are you there? All right, well, while we're waiting for Dennis to come on back to the line here, what was your next topic?
This is kind of interesting.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Dennis, are you there? Dennis, are you there? Okay. We seem to be having issues with our phone system yet again.
Oh, dear.
So what is your next topic?
Right now.
I'm sorry. Dennis, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, good.
Great.
Finally we got you. Just have to, spit on the plug and stick it back into the socket a couple of times before we get a connection. What's on your mind?
The gremlins are working overtime.
The gremlins are all working for Hillary Clinton.
Probably so. I have the utmost respect for you, sir.
Thank you.
I would like to ask Lady Claire one quick question, and please answer quickly, because I got another question.
Okay.
Your opinion about the Pentagon being hit on 9/11. No plane debris, no bodies to speak of. What is your understanding of what happened on that day?
Come on, Dennis. We've covered this topic so many times.
Yes.
Okay?
No, okay. So we'll skip that. We'll skip that.
All right, skip that one.
Let's skip that one. Your point on no fear, that is the mind killer. That is the disease of America. Fear. We're afraid to think about the truth. We're afraid to engage the truth.
Yeah.
Because for what reason? It's complicated, but it's selfish and ignorant and stupidity. That's exactly what it is. And again, I've said it before. We don't deserve freedom. We're such a dumbed down, go along society, politically correct. Bury your head in the sand on every important thing in the world. We don't deserve freedom. We don't deserve to be happy.
Well, let me disagree with you on that one. We deserve freedom, okay? And what's going on, you're right about the fear. And one of the worst fears that we need to recognize and deal with is our fear of looking different than our friends and neighbors. And that's certainly at the core of political correctness, where everybody has to exactly toe the line on what they're saying and thinking and doing, or they're seen as inferior, which is nonsense. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people go along with what they know is wrong, and there's some kind of an instinctive basis for it, because if you go back to the Stanley Milgram experiments on obedience, where this guy found that something like 2/3 of ordinary, moral, decent people will inflict serious pain on total strangers if some authority figure tells them to do that. And there's an instinctive base in there, and we need to understand that is a very harmful instinct. Just like we suppress our instincts to steal and kill and rape for the betterment of our society, it is time for us to suppress that instinct to blindly obey authority for the same reason, for the betterment of our human society.
Some people follow goodness. And I talked to a Canadian professor at length about instincts versus education.
Yes.
And she completely thought that instincts didn't exist. She thought that people behaved only because they were taught to behave that way. I cannot understand her way of thinking. She had been teaching in Canada for 25 years.
Well, that's the whole philosophical foundation of the liberal political philosophy. Is we're all born with blank brains, and everything that we are is the tabula rasa, and everything that we are is a result of the environment. And therefore, if they re-engineer the environment, they can re-engineer the human mind. All of this goes back to Margaret Mead's book, Coming of Age in Samoa, which is the foundation document of the liberal movement. Except, of course, her book was a complete fraud. And it's already been proven. The government of Samoa came out and interviewed the people that Mead had talked to when she was researching the book. And Mead's book contains so many obvious misstatements. For example, Margaret Mead declared that the Samoan people were sexually promiscuous on the basis of the fact that the Hawaiians at the same time were sexually promiscuous. It was completely wrong. Every little Polynesian island has their own evolved culture because of the separation and all the distances. And Margaret Mead made friends with these two young ladies on Samoa, and Samoans like to talk story like Polynesians, and part of Samoan politeness is when somebody is asking you questions that are leading a certain way, you just sort of go along with it. That's the way of being polite. Mm-hmm. And so Margaret Mead went down there to find the example to prove that adolescent angst was the product of our environment and there was no instinctive base for it. And she came back with the book. Liberalism is founded on that, and it's an absolute complete joke. And there are still people in academia who swear by Margaret Mead, and they keep coming up with gender-neutral this and all the rest of it, but little boys go on behaving like little boys, and little girls go on behaving like little girls, and the liberals scratch their head and say, well, we need another program, at more taxpayer price to force people to be what we think they should be in our little hallucinatory fairy tale that we've built around Margaret Mead.
Yeah.
We're instinctive. We're instinctive people.
It's a blend. It's a blend. Yeah. We're a product of our inheritance and our life experience. It's a blend of both. It's not an either-or situation.
I think we should embrace our instincts a little more, but still learn. I got one more question for you about atheism.
Okay.
I'm a Zen Buddhist. I'm an agnostic Zen Buddhist, and atheism is almost as bad as complete belief that there is a God, because you're deciding that there is no God, and maybe there's something out there that we just don't know yet. I mean, shouldn't you not be caught in the middle of that?
No, not really.
No?
Nope, not at all.
I love you, Mike.
All right,
Claire,
thanks an awful lot.
I hope to talk to you again.
All right, thank you for the call.
Yes, Claire and I have some interesting and spirited discussions on that very topic.
But they're always very gentle.
They're always very gentle.
Yes.
The worst we've ever gotten is marshmallows at 20 paces, and, which doesn't change either of our minds, but it puts an interesting pattern on the wallpaper.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we've got about 3-4 minutes left. Have you got one more topic for us?
Yes. There have been leaked internal memos from the powerful Democratic think tank Center for American Progress, CAP, and apparently this group is going to tremendous lengths to placate AIPAC.
No
and
kidding.
Longtime Clinton operative and Israel activist Ann Lewis, including censoring its own writers on the topic of Israel.
Oh, my goodness, another think tank that's biased toward Israel.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how shocked I am.
Yeah, and on a side note, in a Clinton presidency, expect to see the full-throttled enabling of a wretchedly apartheid, genocidal, self-proclaimed theocracy with nuclear weapons, which is what Israel has become in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping that this year, this coming election, it's going to be the year of the Mavericks. There is already, you can see, just by the poll numbers on the current candidates in the two major parties, there is a tremendous anti-incumbency fever sweeping the nation. And hopefully that will include all these friends of Israel that always seem to be involved in all the really bad decisions coming out of Washington, D.C. Bad for us, bad for the American people, bad for all of our children in uniform who are being killed and crippled. And to have Netanyahu come on over here and literally demand the U.S. Congress and the White House kill the P5+1 deal. I hope Americans notice that and remember it a year from now.
Yeah.
Because right now, America needs leaders who are going to put America first, second, and third. And foreign entanglements with Israel way, way, way down on the bottom of the list. But can you imagine the arrogance of Netanyahu coming on over here and telling us that the only way we can atone for our failure to kill the Iran deal is to give Israel an aircraft carrier?
And it's a $4.5 billion with a B dollar deal that he's negotiating for?
Well, it is. And it's an increase in U.S. aid to Israel. For the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
I think it's 10 years.
Yeah.
It's going to be $5 billion every single year, $5 billion taken out of your pocket and given to Israel, every penny of which is a violation of United States law.
Yeah.
Because under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the United States government to give your money to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons that refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow IAEA inspections, and that is, of course, Israel. There's the music. Time for Claire and I to get on out of here and start our Kaahumanu Friday and our relaxing weekend.
Yes.
So we're going to be back here on Monday on the Genesis Communication Network, and until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed, share what you know with who you know. Americans are starting to ask what's going on. Be there with the answers for them. Have a good weekend. Aloha, America.